among Brenda's Quilts, and today I want to introduce you to some techniques used to make the Engaged by Love table runner. I'll just hold it up for you here. So there it is. And as you can see, we have 6 hearts in the middle, and they are done with foundation paper piecing. And then the borders are pieced, and there's a very interesting binding technique that we're going to address as well. So before you start cutting into your fabrics for the pieces that you'll need for the borders and the pre-cut pieces for the foundation piecing, you'll want to cut your binding. The reason for this is if you start cutting your little pieces out of your fabric, you might end up with a chunk left over that is not long enough for your binding. So you want to cut your binding pieces first, and because this is like a split binding with 2 colors, you're going to be cutting 2 colors. So that's listed as your first cutting direction, and it's important to cut those out first. And from there, you can cut out everything else given. And each piece has a corresponding letter and number given to it. And you want to make sure that you label each section or each piece with that number so that it's very easy to put together. The pattern will give you 1 sheet with the heart template, and you'll need to copy that onto paper 6 times. And I suggest that you use foundation paper piecing paper. It's way easier to take out after you're all through. So if you can find a stack of that at your local quilt shop. Get yourself your paper scissors, and you are going to be trimming the excess paper off of each sheet of paper beyond the dotted outer line, and I like to leave about 1/4 of an inch of paper beyond the dotted line. You're going to want to have something like that. To save a little time and to avoid any confusion about the color of your hearts, I would suggest that you find some colored pencils that are the same colors that you'll be using, and color your separate little sections in the corresponding colors. There's a list on page 1, so the first one is an aqua heart and a sprout background. So an aqua heart, I'll just scribble a little bit of aqua in the heart section, and for the sprout background I'll just give a little scribble of the green. And that way I won't get confused as I go along as to what color belongs where. So do that for all the 6 color combinations. The basic tools required for foundation paper piecing are as follows. You will need a cutting mat. It doesn't have to be particularly big. A rotary cutting tool. You will want an add 1/4 ruler. They come in various widths and sizes. Any one of them would be fine. You also want a straight edge of some nature. I'm using a Dritz Easy Hem, but you could also just use a little piece of cardboard or a postcard or something. You're going to need that to fold a straight edge. Also very helpful are flower-headed pins, because you'll need to pin the odd piece in place and then put a ruler on top of it, and of course you can't do that with a round-headed pin. We're going to start with our first heart that has the aqua blue heart center and the sprout background. And if you look at your papers, you'll notice that they're labeled, each space is labeled from A1 to A9. And we're going to start in order always and follow the numerical order, starting with A1. And we're going to take the A1 piece, and I'm using a print here so that you can see where the right and wrong sides go in case you're using a print in your particular Engaged by Love pattern, although ours is a solid. So what you want to do is take your A1 piece of fabric and lay it right side out on the back of the paper, so that when you look through a light or a light box, you can see that it's completely covering the A1 area, giving you at least 1/4 inch beyond the A1 lines that surround the A1 area, okay? And then you will take a flat-headed pin to hold that in place. I'm just going to hold that up to the light just to make sure that I'm good and I'm okay. All right, so right side out. Now, our next piece is A2. So we're going to grab our A2 piece and get it ready to go. But before we do anything with it, we find the line between the A1 space and the A2 space, and it's right here. And we're going to fold along that line. So here's where I use my straight edge or cardboard or whatever, and I place it on that line, and I fold the paper back evenly along that line, making a crease. Okay? And then I'm going to use that crease. I'm folding it back here, putting it on my cutting board, and taking my add a quarter ruler and placing it along that fold line. And it has a little ridge on the back. I don't know if you can see that or not. There's a little ridge. And that kind of slides along the fold of the paper, giving you a 1/4 inch beyond the fold. And you'll use the edge of that ruler to trim with. And that gives you a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so we've got that done. Next, I'm going to take my A2 piece and I'm going to align it to the seam line. And I will put a pin in along the, like where the fold is. And then I can turn this piece back, hold it up to the light, and make sure that it covers the whole area of the A2 space, giving me some extra fabric around the outer line. And you can use a window to check this out. You can hold up your paper to the light, or you might be able to see through it to do it. So that looks fine. So what I'm going to do now is sew along the line between A1 and A2 shapes, so right along here. And I'm going to use a 2 millimeter stitch length and back stitch at each end of that short little line. Okay, so I'm at my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch between A1 and A2. So here's A1, here's A2. And I'm going to stitch along this line, back stitching at each end using a 2 millimeter stitch length. And I need to back stitch and just follow the little line. So there we are, their stitching line. And from there, we can fold this back and you can see against the light of the machine that it's covering our space. One thing I didn't mention was, if you find that your piece of fabric isn't covering the shape, you may just have to turn it the other way around, because a lot of these sections that you're cutting are rectangles. So if the shape looks like it's a long rectangle, use your piece of fabric that way. Okay, so we've just done that. And next I need to turn back that section that we just added and press it. So you might have a little mini iron, which would be handy, or you can just use your regular iron to press that seam down so it's nice and open. All right, we turn our paper over and we have completed piece A1 and A2, and now it's time to put A3 down. So we find where A3 is, and it's a blue piece, and aqua, according to the pattern, and we have a line here between A2 and A3, and we need to fold along that line. So I'm going to use my straight edge again here and fold back along that line. You can remove this pin we had in the A1 piece. And this excess is your seam allowance. So it's got to come off. So you get out your add a quarter ruler and place it along the fold and trim off that excess seam allowance that you don't need. Okay, so here we are, and we need a 3 piece. So here's A3, and our shape is a little bit wider than it is deep. So when I use A3, I will be laying it out this way on the back, okay? So let's, oops, the red thread is very noticeable. So let's lay it out there. Oops, and it's going to be right sides together. So this is the right side. It's actually hard to tell on this fabric because it seems to show through a little bit. Okay, right sides together. Oops, and I'm going to pin along that fold line just to test it, and you should do this too. So if I fold that back and I look through the light, I can see A3. I need to just shift it a little bit. Okay, so I can see that this is going to completely cover the whole A3 shape at this point. So if I pin it here, so now I'm going to stitch between the shapes between A2 and A3 right along this line here, back stitching at each end. Here we go. So you can kind of see that bit of a heart shape emerging there. So we've done A1, A2, and A3, so it's time to do A4. So I've started beyond the dotted line and found the line and stopped over here. And I'm hoping you can see that. Here to here. Okay, so there's our heart, but it needs some tender love and trimming. So we're going to follow the dotted lines on the outside of our pattern piece, not the solid lines, the dotted lines, and we're going to trim along those dotted lines. Okay, more garbage. And there we have our first heart block. So after you've had your mammoth sewing session of foundation paper piecing, you can start piecing your hearts together in a row as shown on page 3 of the pattern. And you are just going to place them as shown, right sides together. You will pin the edges even. And you'll use the outer solid stitching line to stitch across. Stitch them all together in a row, leave the paper on. That won't come off until after your borders are in place. So put your row together and then we'll quickly discuss borders. The directions for sewing your border are found within the pattern and they're very simple to follow. It's just a matter of piecing together one section at a time and joining them together. You also have one little half square triangle, so you will, place those triangles together, right sides together, and sew across to make a little block, and that becomes part of your border as well. So what I want you to do is sew your side borders first and then stitch them on to the center heart section, and you will stitch from the paper side and follow the dark solid stitching line across to get a nice accurate seam. Once that's done and you've got both sides on, you'll iron that towards the border, and then add the short end borders to the table runner. So it's at this point when you have your whole table runner assembled that you will remove all of the paper on the back. So get yourself a garbage can and sit down for a few minutes and take all that away. You will then go on to cut your backing and your batting and quilt as desired. Now there's a pretty good picture on the front cover of the first one I did with free motion quilting on a regular sewing machine. So if you have free motion capabilities, that's a nice way to do it. You just use the width of your foot to make those repetitive lines, and that's quite fun. This one will be a little bit simpler so I can get back to you sooner. Once your table runner has been quilted as desired, it's time to trim it. And I'm going to trim it for this binding technique so that all edges are even on the outside of the table runner. Normally I would leave a 1/4 inch batting and backing, but for this technique we need to trim it evenly. Next we're going to take all of our binding strips and join them together on the length. We've got the two colors. We've got the off-white ecru and the aqua color, and they are all joined together in the same fashion. So you will take them and place one right side up. In my case it doesn't matter because it's a solid, and another one right sides together at a 90-degree angle. So, and you'll take a ruler and draw a line between those little indentation corner points and pin once or twice to hold that together. And then you're going to flip this one so it's right side up, and take your third piece and do the same thing, right sides together. If you're using, if you're using A-print. Okay, and pin. And then we're going to sew on that line. Okay, so I have my strips all together, and I have stitched along that marked line from the indent to the indent. You want to get right into that corner. And now it's time to trim my seam because we don't want that big piece hanging around. So you trim the seam to a 1/4 inch from the stitching line. Now that we have that accomplished, we want to join the strips right sides together, but we want to stagger those joining lines, those stitching lines, a little bit apart. So I would suggest that you just pin the first little section together so that you achieve that. And if you stagger it at the beginning, if they're the same width, you should be fine. But you might be working with two different manufacturers' collections and they might be, you know, slightly different width. So it's not a bad idea just to make sure that your stitching lines will be staggered. And then you're going to stitch along the entire length of the binding. Okay, once you have that all stitched together, you'll want to just press it flat first and then open the seam along the entire length of your binding. Now, it's time, let's trim that edge off too, to fold your binding in half, wrong sides together. We'll do it from the other end so you can see the two colors. Okay, so ridge is very even. This is important. And with wrong sides together, press your binding, revealing that pretty detail. All right, so that's all done. And now we are going to just trim an edge of our binding square. And we are going to measure 1.25 inches in from the end We will then take our runner and we're going to use the back of it in this case. We're going to fold it in half. This will give you a very nice square binding, the technique I'm about to show you. So you fold it in half on the length and you place a pin on each edge. If you have trouble keeping your quilts and table runners square, this is just the ticket. And then you're going to fold the short ends together and find the center. And this technique is not shown in the pattern, so this is a little extra for you. This same technique can be used for our quilts as well. Okay, now we want to find the actual center of the entire quilt. So we fold our pins together here, and we fold this together. And at the point where everything folds together in the center, we place a pin, and that's pretty close to center. So we have pins at each half of each side and a pin in the middle. Okay, now we take our binding and we're going to start binding. We're going to bind from the back and bring it over to the front, so that's why I'm using the back today. Normally you might use the front if you're working with just a regular quilt and regular binding, but what we want to do is take our pinned edge of our binding and fold it in. And just pin it all together. Okay. When we bind this quilt, we're going to start at the long edge in the center and work our way around the entire quilt. So we want to measure what the distance is from the long center, you can see this, from the center to the edge over here, okay? And we want the center of the quilt to measure the same as the outer part of the quilt, and that's what keeps your binding square. So what we're going to do to figure out that without measuring is take our folded under edge, lay it on that central pin, lay out our binding, nice and smooth, and where it meets the edge of the project, we're going to place a pin. And that's going to tell us that this needs to be the same as that, and we can always give it a little stretch if it's a bit different when we pin it. So now this will be the same as that, making it quite square. So we've gone to this point of our project, but we want to now measure down how long this should be, the short side. So we take our pin, we lay it along the center of the project with the pin at the edge here, and we bring it down to this other end of the project and place a pin there. And now this center, when we put the binding on, will be the same as the outer width. Oops, can't see that. Making it square. All right. Now what we want to do is measure with our strip along the entire length of the quilt, starting at the center pin, going over that middle pin and running it over to the other edge where the pin lies, and we'll put a pin there too. And that's going to give us the same measurement along the middle length and along the edge length. Okay, so we worked our way from our beginning point to the first corner. We've gone down the short end, we've gone down the long end. Now we have to go along our other short end here. So we start again where our last pin is. Don't want to get the wrong pin here, okay? And we lay out our binding along the middle again, and we want to place a pin at the edge there, so that we know that this width will be the same as the width over here. All right, now we're coming back to our midpoint. So we worked our way around to this point here. Now we want to measure here. So to do that, we lay our binding here and we pin where that very center pin is. So, okay, so now that is going to be the width we want here on this edge. But we also need a little bit to join it up, and that is the 1¼ inch again that we measured at the beginning. We need also at the end. So I'm going to take a ruler and measure 1¼ inch from my edge, and I'll just draw a line, or you could put another pin in there as well. All right, so we're ready to apply the binding to the quilt. And we start with our folded under edge. And we place it so that that skinnier side of our binding, the blue is the wider, the ecru is the skinnier, is right on that center pin at the length here of the project. And we'll pin that in place. Remove that now. And then we look for our first pin on our binding, and that should be in that first corner. That's where you want it. So we're going to just give it a little tug because it's not quite the same. And we are going to, oops, got some fuzz there. We're going to pin it in place on that half length of the quilt. I always pin in the center area first, and then I divide it up into sections, and that works in any fullness or any little bit of stretch we have to make. Okay. Now, we want to turn the corner. So we've got that all pinned in place fairly nicely into the corner, but we have to turn our binding so that it runs up and is even with this edge of our runner, and then we fold it back. And that gives us a nice little 45-degree angle. So once again, it's coming off the edge, you fold it upwards. There's a 45-degree angle here, you can see that. And then you fold it evenly with that top edge and evenly with the next side we're going to pin to. And you secure that with a pin. Okay, now we're going to take our next pin and place it in the corner, the next corner here. And now this is a little bit sloppy here, so we have to give it a little tug to make it fit, to make it square. So our center is a little bit bigger than our outer edge, and I remember trimming just a little bit off the edge in a corner, and that's probably what did it. So I will pin that in place. And now again, we turn our corner so that it is going off the edge, and there's a 45-degree angle showing there, and we pull back on that and pin that in place. Now we've got the whole length to work with. And I'll take my next pin and place it in the corner. And then I want to just give a little tug. Bring my binding down to the center pin and pin it. And then it's a matter of making it all fit. Draw edges even. And now we'll pin our half and work our way around the project. Okay, I'm working on my last corner now. And just making my 45-degree angle. There. Ooh, okay. Now, I know that this last pin should end where that first folded edge is, okay? So I can go ahead and trim on my drawn line here that we made, nice and square. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is maybe just put a pin here, nothing too elaborate, just a pin. And then I'm going to open up this edge over here, taking out all these various pins. Give myself some nice big tails. And then what I want to do is open up the end piece. And I have to kind of fold the runner over to then place the beginning piece on top of the end piece at a 90-degree angle. And I need to draw that joining line, kind of like we did when we, well, exactly like we did when we joined the binding. So that's my stitching line. And I want to be sure to mark very strongly where the seam is and where that line intersects it. Now I want to take a pin, and where that line intersects the seam, I want to poke through, and I want to match it underneath to that same area, okay? Pin there, and pin, another pin. Okay, so now when I stitch across on my marked line, I want to go right in that area where the pin is and across, and that should match up our two colors very nicely. So I'll go do that. I'm back and I've done my stitching. Pull my pins out, and the big reveal, pretty good. Okay, now I'll trim, either with scissors or a rotary cutter, my seam allowance. And I'm going to finger press this last seam open. You could press it. It's just kind of awkward to move the whole thing over at this stage. Okay, and now this should magically fit the length of the runner, and it does. So let me just give it a little tug because there's a little bit of difference in length. And we pin everything together. Okay. And then I'm going to go over to my machine and stitch this in place. Now, I like to use a walking foot when I stitch various layers in place, and then I don't have any trouble with layers moving around. You may have an even feet foot on your machine. That, of course, is something you'll want to use instead of a walking foot. If you don't have a walking foot, you may have to just kind of stretch your piece as you go, and very carefully stitch it in place so that all layers are laying even. So I will do that for you now. All right, so let us stitch our binding in place. I'm just going to show you how to turn a corner in case you don't know how to do that. So this is my walking foot, and it keeps all layers even as I stitch. So I don't have to pull or tug or anything like that. And it has some handy markings on it so that I know I'm stitching this down at 1/4 of an inch. Now normally you would sew binding for a quilt from the right side, so this is a little bit different because of our binding technique. Okay, I'm gonna get my fingers in the way here for a moment. All right, so we're coming up to our first corner, and what we want to do is remove that pin and flip that little 45-degree angle area off. And we want to stitch just before this 45-degree crease that we've made, so about a stitch or two away from that. Okay, that's a good spot, and I'll back stitch. And I can cut the thread here and flip my little corner over again, turn the entire piece around. Ooh, a bit awkward. Okay. And begin stitching just off the project. And back stitch. And onward. And then we'll proceed all the way around the project. And I'll just finish this off and then I'll show you how it turns to the right side. Okay, so here's our table runner, and we're just going to nip off these little triangles that form because of the seams on the binding. And we'll just do a little short piece of this to show you a technique to stitch it down at the front. So, like you can see here, this is going to be kind of snazzy with this double-colored binding. And I'm going to miter my corner here and pin it in place. There you go. And I will just get some of this up here so it doesn't drag. Stitch this down for you so you can see how this is done. You want to use a thread that matches the blue. And we will thread our needle and put a knot at the end of it. Here's my knot, nice little knot. Okay, and I'm going to take my needle and bring it up, or push it in, you know, kind of a distance away, but I want to bring it up into the blue part of the binding, and I want to pop that knot into the fabric, there. And then I want to just go straight across from where I came up in my binding and just give an anchor stitch there. Okay, now I'm going to do something which I call the ladder stitch. I'm not sure if that's the right term or not, but you move across into the pink area and you go in between the layers into the batting area, and you go up about 1/4 of an inch, and then you poke into the blue again, just a thread or two in. That's my tail end. Okay, and then we want to go straight across from where we poked up in the blue into the pink. And then we go into between the layers again and move up 1/4 of an inch, and then poke into the blue a few threads. Oops. And then across again, directly across, never at an angle or it makes a bigger stitch. Go directly across, poke into the pink, right up in between the layers, poke into the blue, and it makes almost an invisible stitch, which is what you're after here because you're working on the front. I also use this when I work on the back of a quilt though too. Okay, we're approaching one of our corners, and I'll go right into that corner and I'll stitch through all the layers and anchor in that corner. Okay, and then I want to travel into the corner a little bit with just a stitch or two. I won't go beyond the blue because we'll see my stitches in the ecru. And then I'm going to just sink my needle and bring it back into the blue bit there on the next side. And then we just do the ladder stitch again, go straight across, in between layers, up into the blue, and so on. and except for that thread, which is unsightly, everything looks really, really tidy. So give that a whirl and finish off your project. If you've enjoyed this video, please know that I have more patterns available at amongbrendasquilts.com in the shopping area, and there are lots of instructional videos at our YouTube station, Among Brenda's Quilts, that you're welcome to like and subscribe to me there and enjoy. Thanks for joining me.